Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're going to completely strip away that dusty, black and white historical image of Charles Darwin. You know the one, the serious old guy with a massive beard just staring sternly out of a textbook? We're tossing that out. Because the real Charles Darwin, he's a surprisingly relatable hero. His life is literally the ultimate proof that small, meticulous, incremental steps can create absolutely massive transformations in how we understand the world. We're going to trace his journey from an aimless student to a revolutionary thinker, and I promise you, it's a fascinating ride.
And honestly, what better way to kick things off than with this? The Bay of Biscay was hell. I mean, that doesn't exactly sound like the confident words of a scientific conqueror, does it? But that's exactly who Darwin was when he first set sail. He was intensely seasick, he was essentially a medical school dropout, and he had almost zero clear direction in life. He literally stumbled into a world-changing adventure while battling extreme nausea in his cabin.
Part 1, The Accidental Explorer. So how exactly did this seasick dropout change the world? Well, he grew up under the shadow of a highly successful father who, frankly, saw young Charles as a bit of an aimless underachiever. And just as his frustrated dad was pushing him toward a quiet life in the clergy, this totally unexpected opportunity arose to sail on a Royal Navy vessel. Okay, let's dive into this timeline. In December 1831, the HMS Beagle departed on what was supposed to be just a standard surveying mission. But for Darwin, it was a 5-year crash course in the natural world. He started off with no formal academic background in biology. None. Yet over these 5 years, he trekked the Andes, he observed isolated species in Australia, and he explored the incredibly unique ecosystems of the Galápagos Islands. His physical journey across the globe perfectly mirrored his own intellectual internal journey. When Darwin first landed in Brazil, he was completely overwhelmed. He called the jungle a chaos of delight. But that pure awe quickly shifted into rigorous scientific discipline. He found himself facing what he called a pleasant nuisance, basically having to stop every few yards because there was always some new creature, some new flogger, or some bizarre insect to study. This wasn't just casual observation anymore. The meticulous, almost tedious skills of a master naturalist were taking root right there in the mud of the Brazilian rainforest. Part 2, The Secret Theory. Fast forward a bit. When Darwin finally returned home to England in 1836, he was exhausted, but his notebooks were absolutely overflowing. And as he shifted his focus and started studying the distinct beak shapes of the birds he brought back from the Galapagos, he began to connect some very dangerous dots. And that leads us to the grand concept, natural selection. It's the idea that organisms better suited to a certain environment live longer, and then they pass those advantageous characteristics onto their offspring. But Darwin didn't just invent this out of nowhere. The absolutely crucial light bulb moment happened in 1837 when he was reading an essay on human population by Thomas Malthus. Malthus argued that populations outgrow their food supply, which leads to a struggle for existence. And it hit Darwin. This applied perfectly to the natural world. Only the fittest survive that struggle. And that right there is what drives change. So Darwin develops this brilliant, world-altering logic flow. It goes like this. Step 1, random variation. Offspring have slight, completely random differences from their parents. Step 2, environmental advantage. If one of those random differences just so happens to help the organism survive in its specific environment, well, that organism lives to reproduce. And step 3, over generations, that beneficial trait becomes ubiquitous across the whole population. He built this massive theory just by observing tiny, seemingly random differences in nature. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. But hey, let's pause for a second here because I really want to show you his endearingly human side. Right in the middle of formulating the greatest biological theory in history, Darwin was stressing out about his personal life. He actually wrote out a literal pros and cons list to decide if he should propose to his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. On the con side, he was super worried about the loss of time and having less money to buy books, but on the pros side, he wrote about female chit-chat and having a constant companion. Finally, his highly analytical, incredibly anxious brain came to a conclusion, writing at the bottom of the list, Mary, 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 QED. That's the mathematical abbreviation for thus it has been demonstrated. It's just a perfect glimpse into how his mind worked, right? Calculating, cautious, but ultimately decisive. Part 3, The Ticking Clock. Okay, so he had the theory, and he had his wife, so you'd think he's going to publish immediately, right? Not exactly. Paralyzed by chronic illness, possibly Chagas disease, and this crushing self-doubt about the inevitable religious backlash, Darwin just sat on this explosive secret. He hoarded his research at Down House for 2 decades.
But then, the ticking clock finally ran out. In 1858, Darwin gets a letter from a young naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace was halfway across the world, recovering from a fever, and get this, he had independently formulated the exact same theory of natural selection. Darwin was completely stunned. His decades of secretly hoarded evidence were suddenly up against Wallace's entirely independent, newly formulated discovery. Desperate not to lose his life's work, but also wanting to be fair and not rob Wallace of credit, Darwin was forced to act. The two men ended up co-publishing their findings at the Linnean Society that very same year. Part 4. Shocking the World. Now, that joint paper didn't make a massive splash right away. Darwin knew he had to fully explain his theory. So what was planned as a short essay turned into this frantic 13-month sprint to write his absolute masterpiece, On the Origin of Species. This was no longer just a theory. It was an overwhelming barrage of meticulously cataloged evidence, specifically designed to shock the world and just silence any critics. And just look at the sheer weight of what he brought to the table here. He tracked evolutionary development across numerous species. He detailed the intricate specialization of organs to their specific roles. He documented the fossil records of extinct species, proving that life forms had come and gone. He even forecasted the explosion of the human population. He literally weaponized every single piece of data he'd gathered since stepping onto the Beagle to build this impenetrable fortress around his theory. The reaction? Immediate and explosive. The first edition sold out on day one. His friend, the brilliant zoologist Thomas Henry Huxley, read it and famously exclaimed, "How extremely stupid not to have thought of that." But, it wasn't all praise. A fierce religious backlash erupted. Darwin was labeled the most dangerous man in England. The whole thing culminated in this famous debate at Oxford, where a bishop mockingly asked Huxley if he was descended from an ape on his grandfather's or his grandmother's side. Huxley fiercely defended Darwin, basically saying he would rather have an ape for an ancestor than a man who used his intellect to obscure the truth. What a comeback. Card 5. From Apes to Earthworms. Now, Darwin wasn't quite done shaking the foundations of society. In his later work, The Descent of Man, he assertively connected humans to apes. And not just through common bone structures or vestigial traits like the tailbone, but through shared emotional expressions. He argued that reason, imagination, and even a sense of morality had evolutionary roots right there in the animal kingdom. So, what should you take away from all this? How do we summarize a mind that literally conquered the origins of humanity? Interestingly enough, we look at the dirt. In 1881, Darwin published his final book, and it was all about earthworms. He proved that the tiny, continuous actions of earthworms were literally responsible for slowly sinking Roman villas and the ancient monoliths of Stonehenge deep into the soil. I want you to remember this. This final study is the absolute perfect poetic metaphor for Darwin's entire life. Massive, world-shaking disruption achieved through small, quiet, meticulous, incremental actions over a long period of time. When Darwin passed away in 1882, his legacy was undeniable. He had entirely transformed human scientific understanding. Think about it. The man whose father thought he was just an aimless underachiever was buried in Westminster Abbey, laid to rest right alongside Isaac Newton. And in this incredibly beautiful tribute to his life's journey, his casket was carried by his fiercest defenders and his greatest peers. We're talking Huxley, Hooker, and the man who forced him to publish in the first place, Alfred Russel Wallace. Which leaves us with a really fascinating final thought to ponder. Darwin is a household name, right? An absolute titan of history. But given how the theory of natural selection actually came to light, does Charles Darwin truly deserve his singular, towering reputation? Or should Alfred Russel Wallace, the catalyst and co-discoverer, share equally in the historical spotlight? It really makes you think about the collaborative nature of scientific legacy. Thanks so much for exploring this amazing journey with me. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.